Hello and welcome to Woman Inherits the Earth, a mother-daughter podcast about the representation of women in movies and television. I am Tessa Dare, a writer and the author of the paranormal mystery series The Karanzan Chronicles, and Beth's daughter.
And I am Beth Von Baron, Tessa's mother, and also a writer. In this podcast, we talk about movies that feature women as the leading characters or where the story focuses on women or women's issues. Our discussions will also touch on roles available to women, how men have dominated the film industry since its beginnings, and whether or not that is changing. Today, we are discussing Jurassic Park. The film was made in 1993. Running time of 2 hours and 7 minutes, directed by Steven Spielberg, written by Michael Crichton and David Koepp, based on Crichton's novel of the same name. Take it away, Tess.
Yeah, so I feel like this is the one movie we've done so far where I could have probably listed all of those production credits by memory. The IMDb summary states, an industrialist invites some experts to visit his theme park of cloned dinosaurs. After a power failure, the creatures run loose, putting everyone's lives, including his grandchildren's, in danger, because this crazy man also brought his grandchildren to this park. We're gonna kind of tackle this assuming that you have seen Jurassic Park. It was like the biggest movie of the entire 90s. I don't know a single person who hasn't seen it. So if you are the last human being in America who has not seen the original Jurassic Park movie, you should stop now and go watch it, because we are not gonna do a minute by minute summary of what happens in the movie. We're just going to be talking about what the movie means to us, and then we're going to talk a little bit about some of the faulty science, and then we'll talk about what we love about the movie. And also, just a disclaimer, we're probably going to sound pretty nitpicky about some stuff, but as far as I'm concerned, that is just an expression of our love of this movie. We have both seen this movie probably more times than we've seen any other movie.
Any other movie, yeah.
We love it dearly, and that does mean that at this point, the only thing we have left to talk about are the little things that bother us or don't make sense or whatever, whatever we've noticed on the last go-round, which I was surprised that there was one thing that I noticed this time around that I had not noticed before that we'll talk about later. Of course, if you are listening to our podcast, surely you know the name of our podcast, which is Woman Inherits the Earth, and that is Laura Dern's best line in the film, although she's got some good ones, but that's from one of our favorite scenes. It's I will probably be going back and forth between character name and actor name. Sam Neill plays Dr. Alan Grant, Laura Dern plays Dr. Ellie Sattler, and Jeff Goldblum plays Dr. Ian Malcolm. Also just, himself. He's very Jeff Goldblum in this movie. Anyway, this line comes from an exchange between those three, the three main characters. Sam Neill is only really in the background. It's mostly between Jeff Goldblum and Laura Dern. And I guess we'll see if I can do it completely from memory. Jeff Goldblum says...
I have it written down if you don't, so...
Okay. Jeff Goldblum says, what is it? God creates man... Or no, God creates dinosaurs. God destroys dinosaurs. God creates man. Man destroys God. Man creates dinosaurs. And then Laura Dern says, dinosaurs eat man. Woman inherits the earth.
Yes. And it's such a beautifully filmed scene that they're sitting kind of at an angle in the Jeep. So she's in the front row. The two men are in the back row, but it looks like one is sitting behind the other because of the angle of the camera. And the two men turn and look at her after she says this. And it's just the most remarkable scene in a movie where the woman has, upended the conversation and won the battle of conversation.
It's very telling of their characters too, because Malcolm, as a very Jeff Goldblum character, is clearly in love with hearing himself speak. And he's kind of in love with being the smartest guy in the room. So, his whole speech is sort of about how stupid this is for John Hammond to do. And then Laura Dern kind of turns it on him and is like, yeah, and then the dinosaurs eat your whole gender and we get everything.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah,
he
it's
is.
great.
And you're right about his character being the smartest person in the room, but at the end, he actually says, "I hate always being right."
Yeah,
and
yeah.
it's true.
Well, and I don't
So,
know that
yeah.
he's necessarily actually the smartest guy in the room. He's definitely one of the smartest guys in the room.
Oh,
but,
yeah, they're all smart.
Yeah, but I think
super
especially
smart.
when he's in a room with these two, like, it's a toss-up which of the three of them is actually the smartest. And I would argue it's Ellie. But of course I would argue it's Ellie.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that is the scene from whence we draw our name. We had a whole discussion where I had come up with like I don't know, almost 20 potential titles for the podcast, and this one was my favorite, and I believe as soon as I said it, it was your favorite too. So
Oh, and you read them off to me, and you get to the last one, and it's this one, and I'm like, why did you read the first 19?
I wanted to see what your reactions were going to be.
Yeah. No, this was by far the best title we could have come up with. It talks about everything. And I'll just talk a quick minute. I'll try to keep it to a minute about why this movie is important to me. So I read the book, and you know what? I was going to look up what year the book was published, and I think it was 88, 89. Maybe you can look it up while I'm talking. So I read the book and read it again.
1990.
1990. Okay, so it was written in published in 1990, and one of the interesting things in the book is how primitive the technology is compared to today. They're working with a supercomputer that is like the size of a room. There are other science things in this too that we'll talk about in a minute, but that have evolved, but also that were happening in the early 90s. There were a lot of scientific breakthroughs happening in a lot of different areas, and one of them is DNA mapping. One of them is the growth of computers. Blah blah blah. So that's all in here. So I read the book 3 times, and I loved dinosaurs as a kid. My brother loved dinosaurs as a kid. Have always loved dinosaurs. So this was like my dream come true of a book. And then I heard they were making a movie out of it. So I was so excited about this movie. It came out the first day that it opened, I should say. My son, your brother, was a week old. And we went on opening day. We took both of you kids. Simon was a week old and nursed through the movie. This is one of my most precious memories in life because I love this movie so much. I still love this movie. And in fact, I texted Tess last night when I was about 15 minutes into the movie saying, God, I forget how much I love this movie until I see it again. And so it's one of my favorite movies ever. I'm not saying it's one of the greatest movies ever. It's one of my personal favorite movies ever. And it also has this emotional memory for me that we were all there together. And as Tess has heard many times, one of my favorite moments during the watching of the movie was when I could see that one of the main characters was going to get eaten by the dinosaur. And I reached over to Sarah, who was not quite 5 years old, and put my hand over her eyes with a sleeping baby in my arm. And I reached over because I knew it was going to happen. And I just wasn't sure. I was already sitting there thinking, oh, this is going to be a lot more violent than I thought it would be. Should I have brought my almost 5-year-old to this movie?
And that was how I think I went another 2 years not knowing that Gennaro got eaten on the toilet.
He got eaten on the toilet. And actually this time when I looked at that scene, I wanted to make sure. I could not remember if his pants were down or not, but they were not. He was wearing shorts. He was just sitting there. He wasn't going.
Yeah, so, I think that's like I feel like that's a somewhat common misunderstanding or misremembering of the film. I think some people think that he actually went to the bathroom. He did not run into that building to go to the bathroom. He was running away from the dinosaur.
He was hiding in there because at this point they still don't realize the extent of the threat. So he thought he would be safe in a wooden shack. Yeah. Anyway, so let me go on and talk. Go ahead.
To be fair, like none of them have interacted with a T-Rex before. They don't know that a T-Rex can knock a wooden shack down.
But have you read books, man? Have you read any books? T-Rexes were dangerous. I
mean, Gennaro is repeatedly shown to be kind of a money-grubbing idiot.
Yeah, he's an idiot.
And also, like, the whole, as we have talked about before, there's often kind of a moral undercurrent to when characters get killed in this movie, and he is essentially abandoning the children to run into the shack. So it feels a little bit like it's his comeuppance for that act of cowardice.
Yeah, And the two worst characters, and this is actually in my notes for us to talk about when we get there, but yeah, the two worst characters get killed.
Yeah.
And in horrific ways.
In horrific ways, yeah.
And how do we feel about that? So that's a question for later in our discussion. But
I would actually like to talk about fat phobia when we talk about that. So let's remember that.
Okay. So let me get into a few things really quickly. We always sit through the credits, and I was kind of fascinated by the credits. Universal Pictures, Amblin Entertainment. It was filmed in Hawaii, and there were horrific storms, including, I want to say, a hurricane that wrecked the entire production, and they had to rebuild.
I believe, I haven't actually done this, but I believe if you go to Hawaii, you can take like a helicopter tour of some of the filming locations.
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah. The full motion dinosaurs were designed by Dennis Muren, Muren. There was an additional credit for Industrial Light and Magic, so maybe he designed them and they built them. I'm not really sure. But the live action dinosaurs were designed by Stan Winston, who is a fairly famous production designer. I'm not even sure what he actually does, but he's animation guy, I guess, but he's pretty famous. So, the main actors, I don't know if you went over the main actors yet or not, but Sam Neill, Laura Dern, Jeff Goldblum, Richard Attenborough, Bob Peck, B.D. Wong, Samuel L. Jackson, and Wayne Knight. And interestingly, I didn't realize this before. I thought that just when you were looking at IMDb at actors, that it was just older actors who had their pictures in black and white, but it's actually deceased actors. Now, some modern actors who are not deceased have chosen to use black and white photos. But if you look at IMDb today,
on this page, Ariana Richards'
right,
picture
she's
is
the
black
one.
and white.
So Richard Attenborough and Bob Peck are both black and whited out because they are deceased. But then, yes, Ariana, what is your last name? Phillips? Richards is in black and white too. Now, it could be because she's no longer acting. She's an artist, and I actually looked her up. But anyway, so that was an interesting thing to find out, because I always thought it was just the older actors, who in the 40s and 50s and whatever that were in black and white, but it's actually deceased actors. So anyway, my favorite characters in the movie, besides the three main ones, are Bob Peck playing Robert Muldoon. I think he's a great character, and in the book he survives. And one of my least favorite things about this movie that they kill him off. It does not work for me in so many ways, and not just because he's a great character, but because he is a survivor. And actually, that's a theme in Alien. People who have great survival instincts typically tend to survive in movies. So, and of course, the other one was Ray Arnold, who's played by Samuel L. Jackson. And it was my introduction to Sam Jackson. I had never seen him in anything before. I was an instant fan. He is constantly smoking in this film, because this is 1990, 93, somewhere in there, and people still smoked in offices back then. So, but it's constant. In fact, he's a chain smoker. Lights one with the old one, that kind of chain smoker. But still, just a great character, has some great lines. Anyway, I'm going to go through the scenes really quickly. And just talk a little bit about just a few scenes and what I liked about it. The opening scene really sets the tone for the movie. The looks on the workers' faces, the trees crazily blowing in the wind, the men with guns, the mysterious machinery moving something, and we don't know what it is yet. We know because we know it's a movie about dinosaurs, but we're not supposed to know what it is. Just a great opening scene. Spielberg is just a genius with this kind of stuff. He paces this film, and the cinematography in it and the editing, and they kind of work together. Just brilliant. The death of Joffrey. We had never known his name before, but it shows up in closed captioning. This is the first time I have watched this movie with closed captioning up. And there's back and forth cutting here between the dinosaur's eye and Muldoon's eye. And then when he starts saying, shoot her! It's just a great scene. So then we go to the Amber Mine, in the Dominican Republic. You've got calm water, a man on a bar. That's Gennaro, and we think he's, he comes to be he's one of the worst characters in the movie, and he's so out of place in this scene. He's in his suit and fancy shoes and a briefcase against the backdrop of the workers. And of course he slips. And then when he walks into the cave, he hits his head. He's the thing too. And then later on, Nedry does the same thing, hits his head. So there's a lot of repetitive cinematography like that pulls the film together pretty well, I think. So anyway, and the dialogue says, Ian Malcolm is too trendy, but Alan Grant, you'll never get him out of Montana. He's a digger.
Because Grant's like me. He's a digger.
Grant's like me. He's a digger. Yeah. So I made a list of a lot of the best lines in here, and then I couldn't decide, are these great lines because I've heard them so many times, or do other people know these lines as well? Because it feels like a lot of lines come out of this movie that people use in conversation and reference.
Yeah, so what I feel like what's happening with these first two scenes, I mean, first of all, we kind of get like 3 total intro scenes, because then after this we get the actual introduction to Alan and Ellie. But I feel like what's happening with the first scene is he's doing the Jaws thing with the dinosaurs. He's building up the existence of these dinosaurs without directly showing them to you, to kind of build anticipation. And then I feel like that scene where Gennaro talks to the guy digging for the amber is basically kind of doing a version of that, but for Dr. Grant. That is like, that's our intro scene of Dr. Grant without actually showing Dr. Grant. So they show this kind of, this cool guy who's digging for this amber and who is like clearly way more with it than Gennaro, and then he identifies Dr. Grant as being like himself. So we're sort of using this guy and his cool professionalism and then his impression of Grant to kind of create an image in our head of who Dr. Grant is going to be before we actually see him.
And in sharp contrast to Gennaro. So,
yes.
So then we cut to the Badlands. It's the first of many thematic and dramatic jump cuts, I guess you call them, from the mosquito in the amber, and you close it on the mosquito, to the brush gently removing the sand from a fossil in the Badlands. Just wonderful filmmaking in this movie. And then I'm not talking about every scene here. I'm just talking about some of the important scenes at the beginning. But then we get to the arrival at the main building where the main characters have arrived to give an assessment of this amusement park. And it's important because the real story starts here and it also ends here. This is the story. When they arrive, you see this beautiful building that actually looks like a bunker in some ways.
The visitor center.
Yeah, the visitor center looks like a bunker. And you see them arriving and walking in, and then the very last scene that before they get to the helicopter is them leaving the same building. So there's a connection there too. There was a lot of connecting in this movie. So then we get into the lab where the egg hatches, and it's beautiful and heartwarming, and they're all oohing and eyeing. And this actually made me think about the second movie where Ian Malcolm's, and we won't do this a lot, mention the second movie, but where Ian Malcolm is talking about, there's oohing, and then there's eyeing, and then there's screaming.
Are you talking about when they go on the little ride that takes them past the lab?
Before that, so maybe it is. Yeah, they're on the ride. Then they get off because they want to see the eggs. Yeah. They get off and they see the eggs, and so they're oohing and eyeing over this little egg that is hatching, and then he says, what is this? And he says, it's a raptor. And you bred raptors? And Wu nods his head in a way that is, I watched it 2 or 3 times because I can't quite make sense of the expression on his face, but it's almost like he realizes the danger suddenly in having raptors on the island, and it has never hit him before, but something about the tone in Grant's question makes him think. He slowly looks up at him and kind of nods his head, and it is I'm not even sure what the word is that I want, but it's inscrutable, because what is he thinking here when this realization hits him? And by the way, Wu is played by BD Wong, was in, which TV show was that you used to watch all the time he was in?
Law and Order SVU.
There you go.
Yeah, I actually have a really hard time remembering Dr. Wu's name because I just refer to him as BD Wong.
BD Wong, I know. And he doesn't put the periods in BD in the TV show, but in the credits for the movie, they have the periods in there, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, it looks like on IMDb he doesn't use the periods. But I don't know if you're going to get to this or not, but that does come at the end of Malcolm's Life Finds a Way speech. That the moment with Grant is actually right after that. But I did want to say that moment where Grant says, you bred raptors, it's a really great, subtle filmmaking moment, because the way that what they do with the camera, first of all, Sam Neill is very good at kind of walking this line between good guy and like menace. Like he's got kind of a menacing look on his face when they kind of zoom in on him, and you know that it's fear, but it's also like Grant himself is a little kind of scary in that moment. I think probably because it's somewhere between fear and anger, like this sort of anger that you would create this creature that is so dangerous. And I guess also, let me just take a moment to say we're going to be talking about the raptors the way the film world of Jurassic Park talks about the raptors. I know that in reality, velociraptors were not very similar to, or are similar, but like very different to how they are in the film world.
Yeah.
In reality, velociraptors were much smaller. They were like 3 feet tall or something. And there's, I think, pretty decent evidence that they were probably covered in feathers. I get that. That's true. Yeah. But I grew up with this movie, and I'm going to refer to the velociraptors as they are in the world of Jurassic Park, where they are basically unbeatable killing machines.
Yeah, we have to do that because it's part of the story. You can't ignore that. But you do bring up an interesting point about Grant that we should get back to later in our discussion, and that is that he waffles. He goes back and forth between being in awe and being furious. Yeah. And to the end of the movie when he finds the eggs, the raptor eggs, and for his first reaction is, wow, life did find a way. But then he gets scared. And so it's and that's what we're supposed to do too. We're supposed to both be in awe and also furious at the arrogance of these scientists. So there's a lot going on here.
In this scene, it is Malcolm who first notices that something is wrong before Grant realizes that they're breeding raptors. It's Malcolm who keeps questioning Dr. Wu, because Dr. Wu is acting like they have everything under control, and Malcolm is like, well, like, how do you know that you have everything under control? And BD Wong explains that they have bred all of the animals on the island to be female, and that the way they did that was essentially, most, and I, like, as my partner pointed out, I don't think this is actually true for non-mammals. the thing that BD Wong is saying, so what he's saying they did is that most embryos are female, and they need hormones at a certain point during development to create the Y chromosome, and they quote-unquote denied them that. I do think this is overall a huge oversimplification of how reproduction works, and I also think that what he's talking about is true for human embryos, but I don't know that it's true for any other species.
Yeah, you cannot make that extrapolation for other species.
It may even be true.
Especially a reptilian one.
Exactly. It may even be true for all mammals, but I don't know that that's
true. They're not mammals. They're not mammals. They're cold-blooded. So,
and it also kind of relies on this assumption that sex dimorphism is the same in all species. There are species that have chromosomes that are like totally different from ours. So, BD Wong, unfortunately, is the mouthpiece for some of the questionable science in the movie. But Malcolm's point is, even if you think that you have controlled for this thing, that's not how life works. Life finds a way.
Yeah, and so let's get to that scene, because there's right before that scene. So in between, after we see the eggs, then we meet Muldoon, and Grant rightfully has great questions about the raptors that they've bred.
Yes.
So he asks them some questions, and Muldoon says, they show extreme intelligence, they have problem solving, especially the big one, who is a female.
They're all female.
Well, they're all females. Yeah, that's true. But no, maybe not.
Yeah, I guess, some small percentage of them are probably at some point male. I don't know.
Yeah.
I guess that's what they're going with. I do know that there are also, like, species of lizards out there that are technically all female but still reproduce with each other, or that they, like, copulate in order to stimulate their own, like, reproduction. So it's like a hermaphroditic reproduction, but they still copulate in order to start that process going. Sorry, I will stop with the weird science stuff. Continue.
Yeah, we'll get to the science later. We'll pick this up again. But anyway, but Muldoon tells them, that they have problem solving. They're working things out, which we will see later in the film. They are. They test the fences for weakness systematically, and then they remember. And actually, there's a great scene towards the end of the movie where Ellie says, "I hope they can't open doors," and then they cut to the next scene, and it's the thing is opening a door. So anyway, so we go from that scene. We're starting to feel increasingly horrified because we can see that Grant is horrified. So then we move into the scene where they're eating lunch, and Ellie has been a little grossed out by the cow or the steer, I guess. I think they call it a steer, being dropped into the raptor. What are they called? It's a paddock, and being eaten and just it's disgusting to her. And she doesn't want to eat, even though they go in and it's a beautifully laid out lunch, which Hammond is big on. His thing is illusion. So he's trying to push the illusion here that this is a family venue. So he makes this great lunch for them. And they're talking, and he wants their feedback. And this is Ian's big scene. Well, he actually has several big scenes. But he says, the lack of humility before nature that's being displayed here staggers me. Genetic power is the most awesome power that's ever been seen. I'm not sure about that, but maybe that's a science question we can talk about later. But you yield it like a kid that's found his dad's gun. I'll tell you the problem with the scientific power you're using here didn't require any discipline to attain it. I'm not sure that's the problem.
Yeah, I don't think that's the problem.
But he goes on and he talks, but then he says, before you even knew what you had, you patented and packaged it and slapped it on a plastic lunchbox. Now you're selling it. You're going to sell it. And Hammond says, our scientists have done things which nobody's ever done before. And the big important line to me that I've actually quoted in other places is where Ian comes back and says, your scientists were so preoccupied with whether they could, they didn't stop to think if they should. To me, that's a turning point in the movie, and it says everything you need to know about Ian Malcolm, who does survive. But anyway, so that's kind of just the few scenes that I wrote down to give us a feel for where we're going with the movie. So, well, I had a lot of questions about the movie and some problems with it. And as Tess said earlier, we probably were pickier about this because we've seen it so many times and we know it pretty well. So it was probably easier for us to see things this time around that we didn't see the very first time. So here's my question for you. Why did Nedry turn off all the fences? Is that ever answered?
He didn't actually turn off all the fences. He didn't turn off the raptor fence. The rest of the fences go down when they reboot the system.
I thought he turned off all the paddock fences because the Rex breaks through.
He definitely turned off all of the interior fences. I'm not sure if he turned off the perimeter fence, although I think he must have, because I think he goes through the perimeter fence.
He does, and Gennaro actually says at one point, or maybe it's Sam Jackson. It's Arnold. He says at one point, why did he turn off the raptor fences?
No, he didn't. Gennaro actually says even Nedry knew not to turn off the raptor fence.
Yeah,
because the raptors are not. What I realized in this watch through is the raptors are not actually inside the perimeter fence with all of the other animals. They're actually in a different area, which I think is much closer to the visitor center. So that's a whole different question. Why did they put the raptors right next to the visitor center? But the impression that I get from this most recent watch through is that the raptors were in a totally different area. And I think when Muldoon and Ellie go out and see that the raptors have broken out of their cage, that's when Muldoon says that they must have gone down when they rebooted the system.
That was that fence. But before that, he turned off all of the other fences. Maybe not where the raptors are, but with all the other fences. And I don't know what the perimeter fence was, but the paddock fences. He turned off the paddock fences. And why would he do that?
So, okay, I have an explanation. I mean, I think, like, psychologically what's happening is Nedry does not respect how dangerous the dinosaurs are. Because his whole death scene, he's, like, doesn't realize that the dinosaur that he's dealing with, even though it's small, is very, very dangerous. So I think, like, that's thing number one, is he is not respecting what's going on here. And that's kind of his whole character, right? He's literally here as a spy to steal embryos, to sell them to another company, which is, like, an insane thing to do anyway, but especially considering what we're talking about here. We're talking about dinosaurs, and he takes an embryo from, like, everything, including the raptors. Logistically, and I don't know why, but logistically he decided, I guess, that the quickest way to get to the East Dock was to go through the dinosaur enclosures. Because he goes through the perimeter fence. That's what he drives through, and he like gets out of the car and opens the perimeter fence.
King Kong gate, right? The King Kong gate.
I think so. Yeah,
the perimeter fence. Okay.
It says like warning electrified, but he has turned it off, presumably so that he could manually open it. What I don't understand is, I can supply an answer, which is he only has an 18-minute window. However, there has to be another way to get to the dock, because you can hear Sam Jackson telling people to go to the dock because there's like the last boat is leaving in 5 minutes and there's a shuttle or whatever. That shuttle cannot be going through this electrified fence.
Maybe so the only thing I can come up with two things. First of all, when he leaves, maybe he's trying to take an alternate route so nobody sees him. But then he runs into, because his glasses, and his glasses are, so here's another thing. Glasses and mirrors are very important in this movie. So his glasses become an incredible important thing here because they steam up. For some reason, he doesn't turn on the anti-humidifying thing in the Jeep. So the Jeep is steamed up. He's steamed up. He runs into the sign. The sign then twirls around and he doesn't know which direction to go. And of course, he goes the wrong direction. Yeah. And that's what ultimately ends up in his death. But there have been steps all along the way that have, when he loses his glasses down the hill, and I actually have this in my notes, when he loses his glasses and says, "Oh, it's okay, I can afford to buy new glasses." No, sweetheart, you can't see without your glasses, and you're in a fucking jungle. So what is wrong with you?
That's stupid. And also, the reason that he's out of his Jeep at that point is that I guess it sort of crashes, and then it's
down a hill,
sitting. But it's sitting at the top of a sheer drop. It's not a steep sheer drop, so he's able to get down it. But like your plan, because he gets out and he uses the like winch to wrap it around the tree.
Exactly.
So your plan is to use the winch to move your car down this sheer drop. It's gonna go head first. Even if the dinosaur hadn't killed him, I do not see how this doesn't end in the Jeep flipping over with him inside.
He makes so many bad decisions that don't make any sense, and that's one of them. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Since we're talking about it, I'm gonna talk about the fat phobia a little bit. I wouldn't talk about this if they had cast a thin actor, of course, but they didn't. They chose to cast Wayne Knight, who was very heavy at the time. I think that his whole career in the 90s is just like a glaring example of fat phobia in our culture. The characters that he played, the main two characters that he was known for were this character and a character on Seinfeld, which I haven't seen, but my understanding is that he was like this, his character's name was Newman, and he was this like annoying idiot who just like sucked, and he was at the time, he was one of the most prominent fat actors in the industry, and the two characters that he was known for were these bumbling idiots who were like horrible people. Like, this is our conception of what a fat person is that they are stupid, like blindingly stupid and evil, basically, like just corrupt. And also he's constantly eating snacks every time he's on screen.
Usually sugar, usually candy bars.
Sugar. They film him in sitting in like the most unflattering chair.
Disgusting. And his whole workspace, and it actually Samuel Jackson, goes over there to fix stuff and knocks everything off the thing. And there's a scene before that where they do a long shot of it, and you can see what a fucking mess it is. And the thing is, they are conflating his being fat with him being disgusting. And there's two different things. He can be disgusting and sit there and eat candy all day and just be this asshole. And he is an asshole to everybody. Everybody he talks to. There isn't a single scene in this movie where he is a decent person. Even when he's talking to the criminal who's paying him. Yeah, he's an asshole to him.
He's an asshole. He like insists that guy pay for the meal that they're sharing, because he's greedy. He's greedy and slovenly and a slob.
He is the caricature of the stupid, evil, ugly, fat person. You're right.
And like the implication, because he is the only fat person we see on screen, the implication is that this is what fat people are like. They are all greedy. They are all slobs. they are all disgusting. So anyway, I wanted to point it out. I've never been comfortable with that, and the older I've gotten, the more you said that your least favorite part of the film is the fact that Muldoon gets killed. I do dislike that. My least favorite part of the film has always been Wayne Knight's character's death, because I think that scene is so uncomfortable, and because it is such a clear example of the way that we hate fat people in this society and don't even question it. Like, he's fat, therefore he's disgusting, therefore he gets the most horrifying death that I had ever seen at the time.
I know. And the thing is, both he and Gennaro, who get killed in the movie, never get a shot at redemption.
Yeah. And
I'm not saying that every quote-unquote evil character in a movie has to be redeemable, but there is nothing redeemable about his character. At least Gennaro, there's not really a lot redeemable about him, but at least he's thin, you know. And he like you said earlier, he runs and leaves the kids in the Jeep when the dinosaurs coming for them. And so let's just get to this now. But one of the questions that I have, it's not a problem with the movie, but a question that I have about the themes in the movie is these two characters who are so evil, portrayed as evil, characterized as evil. Do they get what they deserve? Does anybody deserve the kind of death that they get?
Well, here's my question. Are they written that way so that we don't feel bad about their deaths?
Yeah, that's a good question. And they're also written differently than in the book. I will say that, and I don't think Gennaro dies. I think he survives, and Muldoon survives, and then Hammond in the book is killed. In the first
Dr.
book.
Wu is also killed in the book.
Dr. Wu is killed in the book. So the characterization of who's evil and who deserves to die is slightly different in the book than it is in the movie.
Also, should we talk about the funny thing that Malcolm gets killed in the book and then is still the lead of the second book?
Oh, and how do they explain that? That's another big problem. I don't mind that so much because I love the character.
Yeah.
But it is very clear in the book, and you're right. Because of the movies, I had completely forgotten until you just said that Malcolm is the biggest loss in the book. It is traumatizing, his death, because he's the moral voice. He is the moral voice in the book and in the movie. And in the book, he gets killed, and it is just so wrong. And maybe that's why they brought him back.
Because I'm pretty sure the way they do it is you don't see him die on the page. Someone asks about him and someone else shakes their head.
Yeah, and that's exactly what happens. So it's nebulous. Here's another thing, and this is a science question. I don't mean to do a quick jump here, but he can't see us if we don't move. Okay, so there's a thing about dinosaurs in this movie that they just made up on their own.
Yeah,
and
there
is absolutely no proof anywhere that if you just don't move.
Yeah, we don't have dinosaur eyes. Like, we don't have preserved dinosaur eyes.
But even if we were completely convinced of that, dinosaurs could smell you. Mm-hmm. Humans have a smell. Predators have predators have a strong olfactory sense. That's how they find their prey sometimes. Plus there's movement in the scene.
Exactly.
Maybe they're not moving, but there's other movement. And actually the dinosaur, the T-Rex gets so close to them. By them, we're talking about Alan Grant and Lex. They're sitting in front of the Jeep, trying to stay still, and he tells her, be still, don't move. The dinosaur gets so close that he blows on them and knocks Grant's hat off.
Yeah.
And that's movement.
Yeah.
And, Gennaro sitting on the toilet wasn't moving.
Exactly.
You could smell him.
Yeah, it was very apparent to me this time. When Gennaro is sitting on the toilet, the only movement that he does is he's shaking a little, he's trying to wipe water out of his face, and his arms are moving just a little bit. And the T-Rex sees him and eats him. That's way less movement than when Alan and Lex are in front of the Jeep, because the T-Rex pushes the Jeep around, forcing them to run around. That's way more movement than Gennaro was doing.
Absolutely it is, yeah. So here, in that same scene, there's another problem. They make a big deal about when Gennaro leaves the Jeep, he leaves the door open. And the kids, of course, are in the Jeep, and they don't know what's going on. They've got the flashlight on, and they're moving around, and so that's why the T-Rex attacks it, because he can see the light from them. And at some point, Tim, the boy, reaches out and closes the door. But before he does that, in between... You saw it too. Okay, in between where Gennaro runs away and Tim closes the door, there's a long shot of the Jeep and that fucking door is closed. Now, I realize it is hard to get continuity right. I completely understand that. But this was a major element of this scene.
It's what the whole scene is about, basically.
It's what the whole scene is about.
Yeah,
Anyway.
and I think there's 2 long shots of the Jeep with the door closed.
Okay, that could very well be.
It has always kind of annoyed me that Lex is the one who turns on the light, just because, like, I get that the boy is the one who's supposed to know about dinosaurs, but I don't feel like you need to know about dinosaurs to know that, like, if you're hiding from something, don't turn on a giant flashlight and start shining it at that thing.
Yeah.
I think Ellie is a great character, but I feel like Lex is often treated with kind of a sexist lens. Like, she's the one who screams the most. She's the one who turns on the flashlight. In the scene where they raise the goat up for the T-Rex to eat, she's the one who freaks out about it because she's a vegetarian. And as a vegetarian, I feel offended that we're treating vegetarians like we're just wilting flowers who don't understand how the animal kingdom works.
She gets sneezed on too in the scene where they're in the tree. Yeah. She's finally overcoming her fears, and she gets paid back by the dinosaur sneezing on her and walking away. It's making fun of her, just like it's like Nedry. It's like these are characters to be made fun of.
Yeah, it feels like she is often the butt of the joke, and it's like they made Ellie this like strong character who can't really be like a full-on damsel in distress, so instead they gave all of that to Lex, and she does get her little redemption moment at the end when she's the one who like sorts out the computers. There are some parts where I think it works, like when she and Tim are running from the velociraptors inside the kitchen. That scene is great. I have no issues with that scene.
She saves her brother in that scene.
Yeah.
So she's a hero in the end. She gets the computers rebooted, and she saves Tim. She absolutely saves his life.
And it just reminds me of a general issue that I have that mostly comes up in horror movies, where they will have women scream in this high-pitched voice at the top of their lungs anytime they're afraid, and I just find it very unrealistic. And it happens in the scene when Grant gets her out of the car, and she's like up against the car, and she sees the T-Rex. She screams while the T-Rex is not looking at them, and I don't think that's realistic. Even if she is a teenager, I think most people in that situation would freeze. And that's what she does later when they're in the room with the velociraptors. She does the freeze thing instead. I just feel like it is this weirdly persistent sexist trope to have these female characters scream in instances when it feels like the more realistic reaction is to freeze and not scream. And it's always women.
Also, Lex is really good at following directions. Anytime they're in a dangerous situation and Grant tells them what to do, she does exactly what he tells her to do. Because number one, he's the father figure in this, but also he's the evolutive authority. He knows what he's talking about. She doesn't know anything about dinosaurs. So she listens to him. She does exactly what he tells her to do. Tim never does. And in fact, repeatedly gets them into trouble because of it. So yeah, you're right. It's like she's definitely the responsible of the two kids. However, the other thing that's going on here is the treatment of children in this movie is interesting. So the first kid we see is when they're in the Badlands, and Grant deliberately scares his kid to death. Although it's a very important scene because he's basically telling him how velociraptors, how they hunted, that they hunted in packs. That they would distract you, and then they'd get you from the front, and then you're still alive while they're eating you. And that's a horrifying thing to say to a kid.
And he uses he's got like the velociraptor claw, and he actually uses that and like draws it across the kid's belly. Yep. I like Ellie's line after that. She says, if you wanted to scare the kid, you could have just pulled a gun on him.
Yeah, it's horrifying. Yeah. However, it is a setup for later in the movie when this is exactly what happens to Muldoon. It's how he gets killed. And Muldoon, who is a fierce and ferocious protector of the people he's been hired to protect, still does not know anything about velociraptor behavior. He doesn't know what Grant knows. So if he had known, he would have known that aiming your gun at one of them is not going to do you any good because the other two are surrounding you. And that's what happens to him, and he gets killed.
I do have one question that relates to this scene, and I think I have a bit of an answer, but so when they reboot the computers and then they have to go into that other building to flip a bunch of switches, basically, and initially they send Samuel L. Jackson, Mr. Arnold, by himself.
By himself.
Why do they send him by himself? Why doesn't Muldoon go with him?
I suspect it's because it didn't occur to them that when they shut down the power, the raptor fences were down.
I think that's what it is, but I feel like that's not quite a good enough answer because
I agree. Why didn't she go with him? Why didn't Muldoon
go with him? Because even if the raptors aren't out, you're still on an island with a bunch of dinosaurs, and you have no idea where any of them are.
Yes, and when the two of them go, when Muldoon and Ellie go to find him or go to the shed, that's when Hammond tells them, "Oh yeah, it's in the shed, clear on the other end of the compound." Is basically what it is. So Sam Jackson's character knew that, but he doesn't think anything of it. He thinks he's protected. He thinks he's inside this protected area. He's going to be fine. But they say to him, they should have realized, no, he's got to go all the way across the compound. And he actually even says it's only 3 minutes. Well, it was way more than 3 minutes when the two of them went. So that's a big problem, I think. They don't. Again, it's Alien. If you let's compare this to Alien for just a minute. People make stupid mistake after stupid mistake for various different motivational reasons in Alien, and all of them lose their lives. If they had just listened to Ripley, they would have survived. But they never do.
In Alien, the premise of that movie is that none of these people are really equipped for what they have stumbled across. They're
Except
minors,
one of them.
basically.
One of them does, but the robot guy, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And in this movie, there's similar kinds of things going on. They are making stupid mistakes that will not protect them in the end. Greed. I mean, there's again all kinds of motivational reasons for it. It's not just greed for Hammond. It's really more of his crown. He wants his crowning achievement in his life, and he's an illusionist. He's a circus guy. He's been building circuses his whole life, and that's who he's a carny. And that he's a very successful one.
And I know, the real answer is so that they could have this scene, and probably the in-universe answer is because it would have cost more. But my question is, why do they have to go to a whole different building to reboot everything? You'd think that would just be in the same building. Why is it in a totally different building?
Much closer, much closer. And you can see that all this electrical stuff would need to be in a shed by itself, because at that time, computers were much bigger and needed a lot more power. Because 1990s, early 90s. So but it could have been closer.
Or there could have been a tunnel to it.
Yeah, that would have protected them.
if that you're building an island where you're going to create a bunch of dangerous animals that may try to eat you, I don't know, maybe a network of tunnels is the first thing you should build.
Well, and if anybody had said that to him at the end, he would have said, "Yeah, I'll do that next time," because he keeps coming back with this. "I'll do that next time."
I thought you spared no expense, sir.
You spared
no expense.
No expense, yeah.
Well, this is actually another, getting back to Nedry. My partner and I were talking about this while we watched last night. So Nedry's whole thing is that he's basically stealing these embryos because he's got money troubles, and he wants more money, and Hammond won't give him more money, and he won't give him more money because Nedry is paid what he bid on the job. So Nedry bid for this job, and the implication is that Hammond picked him because he bid the least. But I thought he was sparing no expense. The line that he keeps saying is we spared no expense, except when it comes to the technology that runs the whole island.
That keeps the people safe.
Yeah.
He spared no expense on everything that looks good. The food, the design, the building, and all of that stuff that's an illusion. But the actual things that keep people safe. There's a line, let's see if I can find it really quick, that Sam Jackson's character says that it's just extraordinary. So they put all this money into the pretty stuff. So the line that Sam Jackson has is, "We have all the problems of a major theme park and a major zoo, and the computers aren't even on their feet yet." And I think immediately prior to that, he says something like he has 151 things on the glitch list for that day. So he had 151 things to take care of on his glitch list for that day. So there are a lot of problems with this park. The technical problems have not been ironed out, and this man brings his grandchildren to this park.
Yeah. It is kind of crazy to me that Hammond is not in the movie painted as the bad guy. The movie kind of consistently paints him as just this guy that you should feel sorry for.
Harmless old man, old teddy bear.
I'm just this kindly old grandpa who is endangering the lives of my own grandchildren as we speak.
He's endangering everybody's lives, and he comes across as huggable and lovable and just a little deranged. He's just a little deranged, but not in the book.
He just believes in in his own mythology a little too much.
Yeah, it's a flea circus or whatever. But in the book, he is much more evil.
He's like a hard capitalist in the book, right?
Oh yeah, he's Gennaro in the book, but Gennaro's also in the book. So
I feel like in the book, Gennaro is just sort of like he's just a lawyer.
Yeah, he's not a fully fleshed out character like he is in. They've kind of taken some of Hammond and put him into the Gennaro movie character, I think.
Yeah, and that's because that's kind of Michael Crichton's thing. Is a lot of the characters that he writes kind of just are their profession.
Mm-hmm. I do love his storytelling, but his character development lacks.
Yeah,
it's not great. But so a couple other things that I had questions about or just comments on, and then we can get into some other things. But in the scene in the Badlands, Grant talks about the half moon shaped bones in the wrists of these dinosaurs, the Velociraptor, and he says something like, "This is probably how they learned to fly," or something.
No wonder they learned to fly.
No wonder they learned to fly, yeah. And people, and these, he's got all these students with him, graduate students probably, on the dig, and they laugh. And he says, no, it's serious. The dinosaurs became birds at some point. And this was a theory that was first proposed by the English biologist Thomas Henry Huxley. I don't know if he's related to the other two Huxleys, but I would assume, because it was a pretty brilliant family, in the 1860s. But made popular by Robert T. Backer, who is still alive. He's 79. I just looked him up this morning. And I have his book somewhere because I was into dinosaurs and I bought the book. So
Tim also has the Backer book.
Yes, Tim has the Backer book. You're right. So a couple of things film-wise that I thought were interesting. When they're climbing down the tree scene, where he gets Tim out of the car and they're climbing down, and I realize it's a film and they have to make it dramatic. Mm-hmm. But that tree, they could have climbed laterally.
Yes,
and gotten
exactly
out of the way of the car. And every time I see this movie, every single time, that's what I say. No, go to the right. Go to the right.
Just go to the right. Yeah, I feel like the way they film it, because they do this kind of like close up, so you sort of can't see the back of the tree. Yeah. So they do a good job of filming it to convince you that this makes sense, but it doesn't make sense. It's twice, because it's when they're coming down, they could go to the right, but also when they get to the bottom, Grant starts to move them forward, even though if they had just stayed where they were, they would have been totally fine, because the tree has stopped right beside two giant trunks that they are sandwiched between. If the car falls forward at that point, it's not going to hurt them because they're already protected by the trunks. But for some reason, Grant moves them forward, I think so that they can set up the line that they're in the car again, but at least they're out of the tree.
But also, there's another scene at the end of the movie when they're hanging on the dinosaur sculpture, and Tim falls, and the dinosaur lands around him. Spielberg is always looking for those kinds of shots that repeat.
The visual symmetry.
Yeah, and I almost think I should go back and watch Jaws and see if he's doing it in there too, if he's developed that technique yet. But he's definitely, there's repetitive visual images throughout the movie, and it's brilliant. I mean, it's absolutely fucking brilliant, but it's crazy.
The funny thing about watching this scene for me in my life yesterday was literally just 2 days ago. I was at a wedding and I was talking to somebody about why I don't like the film Prometheus, which is technically a very late sequel to Alien. And in my opinion, the whole movie it's like if somebody tried to remake Alien, but they didn't understand why Alien worked, even though I think it's like actually also directed by Ridley Scott. But whatever, I'm fine with saying that I don't know that Ridley Scott actually understands why his own movie worked.
Absolutely. I don't think he's a great director, but
one of the things that happens in Prometheus is Charlize Theron's character is running away from this like giant obelisk as it falls forward, and it's just this huge wide shot of her running forward to outrun it when she could run to either side and be fine.
And I realize they have to do that for the drama of the visual scene. But don't they realize that you and I and thousands of other people are going to see this and ask the same question?
And the thing is, like, in the part of the reason that it bugs me in Prometheus is that it's just like the last in a long line of characters making insanely terrible decisions that they should not make based on their own characterizations. This is a movie where the guy who is in charge of navigating and like understanding the map is the character who gets lost. Are you kidding me?
That's in Prometheus?
That's in Prometheus.
See, I haven't seen any of those movies. I mean, I saw Alien and I saw the second one. And I think I only got about halfway through it because I could not get over that scene early in the movie where she realizes that her child has grown up and died from old age. It was so horrifying to me that I couldn't. I mean, I think I maybe finished the movie, but I never watched another one. So here's another question. Is Ellie a medical doctor? I mean, I know she's a paleobotanist and she's got a PhD, but does she have an MD or is she a vet? Because she tries to figure out the problem with the Triceratops. Oh, and by the way, this version of the movie, I thought she figured it out, but I did not.
I did too. I think it's in the book, and we've both read the book. I think in the book she figures it out.
Because I thought, did they cut a scene out of this?
It's the stones, right?
It's the stones, yeah. So they're eating I don't know. Do you remember what it is?
Yeah. So they've planted West Indian lilac berries around because they look good, but they're poisonous. But the doctor is convinced that the animals don't eat it, and she eventually figures out that what's happening is the berries are dropping onto the rocks, and the Triceratops consume the rocks to help them digest. Yeah,
which is something a lot of big animals do. But so that's what it is. Ellie also gives Malcolm a morphine shot. So just seem to be indications that she's got a medical background.
Maybe she's a field medic. That
would make sense. If they go on digs, they do have to have somebody who is a medic, I guess. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. I'm not sure how old she's supposed to be. I believe Laura Dern was only 23 when this film was made. And the character in the book is supposed to be about 22, 23, I think. She's like the youngest person on the dig.
But she's still a doctor. She's got a PhD.
But this is what I'm saying. How old would she have to be a medical doctor and have a PhD? Also, I think in the book, she's getting her
Maybe
PhD.
So.
But generally, I think she's only supposed to be at most 25, and I cannot imagine that she's like a career archaeologist and an MD and only 25.
So here's another question, and this is questions about the characters seeming to have skill sets outside of what we know to be their expertise. So Malcolm, when he's injured and they're in the room where they're protected, I forget what they call it, he and Hammond are, and Ellie and Muldoon have gone out to flip the switch and turn the power on. How does he know to tell Ellie to follow the cable wires? So this is early in computers. How would he know that? What is his background? He's a mathematician, right? Maybe he does know computers.
I mean, or maybe he just knows how to read a map and he can just tell on the map that there's like a bundle of cables that goes the whole way.
But it's a question. So, and the very last question I have in my series of questions, and these are things that I think I have thought of over the years, seeing this movie over and over again. But here's the last one. Why? This one has never occurred to me before today. Why is there food laid out in the dining room in that last scene where he drops the kids off and they eat when everybody has left the island for the mainland? Who laid it out?
Not just food, but like cakes. Like multiple fancy decorated cakes are just sitting in this dining room.
Yeah, and fruit.
Mm-hmm. The ice cream makes sense because the ice cream was like in the freezer and would keep for a long time. And it was thawing
because that's why he got it out and was eating it. Yeah.
Not only has everybody left, but like apart from the roughly like 6 people who were here as visitors, everyone else here just works here. Are you guys just like constantly having these fancy cakes for the people who work here? Like, I mean, why do you even have that many kitchen staff at this point? You have no guests on the island.
They might have set it up as a display to show the visitors, but then it's been sitting out for 24 hours and everything looks fine. Of course, it was just cakes and fruit, things that would be okay, I guess, setting up for 24 hours. But it's a question. Yeah. So, do you have any questions, comments like that about the scenes, or?
Well, okay. The big thing that I noticed this time around. So it's always been a little bit weird. The Deus Ex Machina at the end of the movie when they're running from the Velociraptors, and then all of a sudden the T-Rex is inside the room with them, and the Velociraptors are distracted, and it's a Velociraptor versus T-Rex fight. It's a very fun scene. The thing that has always bothered me is it does not actually look like the doors into this building are big enough for the T-Rex to fit through. So that's thing number one. And thing number two is this time around, I was paying very close attention. The fence that they turn on that shocks Tim is the perimeter fence. And the way that scene is filmed very much implies that the T-Rex is still on the inside of the perimeter fence. And the visitors center is on the outside of the perimeter fence. It makes total sense that the velociraptors are there because, as we said before, for some reason the velociraptor cage is outside of the perimeter fence. But the T-Rex should be inside the perimeter fence when they turn it back on. So how does it materialize outside of the fence and then inside this building that does not seem to have a very large door?
That was actually a question for me in 1993. I remember asking that. I said, where did the T-Rex come from? At the time, I remember thinking that he must have broken in, he or she, I guess it would be a she, had broken into the visitor center through windows or whatever. But let's go back to the very first scene when they arrive. This building is a bunker. It's designed as a bunker. The walls are solid. It is metal. It looks like a military bunker. How did he get in? Through the door? This 20-foot tall dude, femme fatale.
Yes, woman, she.
Gets in through the little bitty doors. I mean, it is a double door, but still. There would have had to have been some structural damage done to the building for this animal to get in.
And again, this brings me back to, if we built the visitor center as a bunker, why did we put half of the technology in a fully separate building with no interior way to get there?
The only thing I can think of for that is that computers back then were so much bigger. Because I think the computers are in there too. What did they call them back then? Supercomputers that took up a whole. They were called supercomputers at that time, and they were tall and took up a room full of space, and the kind of computing
but a tunnel.
Yeah, a tunnel would have happened. But in his book, and I went back and read Jurassic Park about 10 years after it originally came out, and he talked about the supercomputers that were required to do the DNA mapping and how they took up rooms full of space. They took, the massive amounts of space. So that's another question. In 1993, DNA mapping was a relatively recent thing. Okay, and let me just back up here and say that a lot of that, what do they call it? Breaking down the genetic code or the
DNA sequencing?
Yes. A lot of that work was done in St. Louis. It was done at Washington University. And I paid attention to it when it was happening because it was a big deal. And it did take about 5 or 6 years, you could imagine, to map the entire genetic sequence. And yet, it's 1993. They started this in 1990. And according to these people, that work was all done, according to this movie, that work was all done, and they were using that technology to map dinosaur DNA in just 3 short years. Now, it didn't happen.
I mean, that was kind of a Michael Crichton specialty, is he would take a technology that was in its nascent stages and kind of imagine,
extrapolate.
Well, what if we could, what if we could get it to X point, and then what if we ran with it way too crazy? Which I just feel like the great irony of that is that Michael Crichton died not believing in human-caused climate change, even though it feels like human-caused climate change is the end result of every book he's ever written. He's always writing, was always writing about what if humans took their technology too far and didn't pay enough attention to the natural world.
Man's impact on the natural world is one of his dominant themes in his books. So the only thing I can say is that he died pretty young. He was in his 50s. And he also was a medical doctor, and he was unable to save himself. I mean, he died, I think, of cancer. It was kind of ridiculous. But the only thing I can think of is that he died before climate change, before it was fully accepted by the general population. And he went about trying to prove things or disprove things and using the scientific matter. He actually wrote might have just been a really long article. And he had fully convinced himself that climate change was not happening because of human behavior.
He died in 2008. I do think at that point it was not necessarily widely accepted by the populace, but by 2008 the scientific consensus was that climate change was real and it was caused by humans.
I think he was also, he was a Republican too. I'll just say he was a conservative. A lot of his themes are about misbehavior of humans and how we get what we deserve. That's a very conservative approach or attitude to have about humanity. So he's kind of a negative guy and a conservative guy.
He was a complicated man.
He was a complicated man. And I loved his books. I've read every single one of them.
I think I've only read 2.
Yeah, didn't you read the first one?
I've read Andromeda Strain. Was that his first one?
That's his first one, yeah. And brilliant book.
I think it is a very compelling book. I do think that it is very clearly an early work of his because the characters are so incredibly one note. Oh, and of course, I am one of the few living humans who actually has seen the original movie version of Westworld, which was written and directed by Michael Crichton.
Yes, it was, yes. And the thing about Michael Crichton, too, with his women characters, getting back on a little bit back on topic here, is they were so one-dimensional. I mean, you mentioned all of his characters were, but the women were the worst. Even when they were the heroes, they were the worst. So Ellie in the book is a hero. There's a scene in the second movie where the character played by Julianne Moore is on the roof and she's trying to climb and the tiles are falling off. That is taken directly out of the first book, and it was Ellie.
Yes. They are falling off, but also she starts to use them to hit the velociraptors.
Yeah, and that's how they survive. And so she's a real hero in the first book, and she is in the movie too, but not in the same way.
I think she doesn't have quite the same extended action scene that she had in the book. Because, that's actually, I believe that's the scene where Dr. Wu dies. I assume the answer is no, but have you ever seen Jurassic World, the terrible recent sequel?
I've only seen the first one, and Opie's daughter is in it.
Yes, Bryce Dallas Howard. I mean, I hated Jurassic World. I will come right out and say I think the Jurassic World movies are terrible, extremely sexist. Like, it's wild to me that they are so much more sexist than the movies that came out 20 years before.
Yeah.
I think that overall, Jurassic Park as a movie is, especially for a movie at the time, pretty gender balanced. Ellie's great. Laura, I mean, granted, part of this is just that I love Laura Dern.
Yeah.
I think she's so fun and charismatic.
They're fully fleshed out, though. They're fully fleshed out female characters. Yeah.
Yeah, and even Lex gets, like, her scene at the end where she gets to do something, and neither of the female characters are ever, like, punished for being women who aren't interested, or who aren't, like, spending their time taking care of babies. Mm-hmm. Whereas the whole frickin' dramatic arc of Jurassic World is that Bryce Dallas Howard's character, her sister is going through a divorce and sent her 2 sons to Bryce Dallas Howard's dinosaur park so that her sister could take care of her children while she deals with her divorce. And then we're supposed to think that Bryce Dallas Howard is a terrible person because she isn't spending that much time with her 2 nephews who she didn't even, like, know that they were going to be there. It's, like, in the middle of an important meeting for her. It's just, like, it's so crazy to me that movie is hell-bent on punishing her character and her extremely competent female assistant for being a career woman when she does not have children. These are not her children. She does not want children.
It's a constant. It's a constant theme in television and movies. And actually, we could get into talking about this in terms of Grey's Anatomy, which does a great job with this, by the way. But women being forced to choose between careers and motherhood in 2024, it's ridiculous.
Having made their choice and getting punished for making, quote unquote, the wrong one. Because the thing that really bothers me about the movie is that Bryce Dallas Howard's assistant gets, like, the worst death of the whole franchise. Yes. And, like, she's literally just a competent assistant. She is not related to these children. And then she gets this, like, horrifying death that, like, I saw this movie in theaters and people laughed.
You know,
I was so horrified.
I cannot remember how she died, but I remember crying. It was horrible.
She gets, like, picked up by a pterodon and then, like, tossed around and then, like, thrown over some water, and then a giant sea creature comes up and finishes her off. It's, like, so extended. It keeps going.
Oh, that's horrible. I remember now.
I have never been so, and I've seen, like, gross horror movies. I have never been so horrified by a movie seeing experience as I was by the experience of seeing Jurassic World. And I say that as a person for whom Jurassic Park is one of my favorite movies.
Yes, thank you.
I think the Jurassic World movies are a freaking abomination.
And I have seen all 3 of the originals. and that are the first series, because Crichton was still alive, Spielberg was still involved. He's not involved with these movies, I don't think, is he?
I think he's probably a producer,
executive
but
producer, whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think he directed any of them.
No, he's not directing them, and Spielberg is a much better director than that. So I'm not going to watch them. Except for the first one, and I went because it's dinosaurs, but it was so bad. And what is the actor's name? Chris. He's one of the Chris's.
Chris Pratt.
Chris Pratt. He's a throwaway actor as far as I'm concerned. He's okay. He's charismatic. He's not a great actor. He's a throwaway. Yeah. He's a throwaway.
He does not have the gravitas or the interest of any of the original three leads.
The original three characters, and Sam Neill. I'm a huge Sam Neill fan, and you have to.
He's great.
You have to remember that Sam Neill's been around a long time. When I was in high school, he was in the original Damien movies.
The Omen.
The original Omen movies. Yeah, he one of them. I think he was, the devil. I don't remember anymore. But
he was Damien?
He was Damien, yeah. So, and I haven't seen them in 50 years. I mean, I don't remember them, but my mother forced me to go. But he was in those, and that was how his acting career launched. And then he was just a character actor for years and years and years until Jurassic Park really catapulted him into a real career.
And then, of course, he was Merlin.
In
Merlin, there was just a mini-series called Merlin, and he was Merlin.
I haven't seen that. I'll have to see that.
I believe his love interest is played by Isabella Rossellini.
Oh, Isabella Rossellini, love her. Okay, so we're getting long here, so I'm going to throw out a couple lines from the movie. And we were talking earlier, I think, before we started recording, is I can't remember if these are just lines that, because I've seen the movie so many times, I remember them, or if they are lines that other people have also picked up on and have become kind of iconic moments in this movie. But, the He's a Digger one is one. And then when, they say they might not have to dig anymore. And Grant says, where's the fun in that? And then, of course, the scene with the little boy where he's, telling him how the velociraptors would kill him. Spared no expense. Okay. I actually made a note of every time this is used. In the trailer, when he's trying to get them to come to Costa Rica, he has the champagne that he's opened. As they sit down to enjoy the sea bass and the spectacular design of everything, he mentions it there. When they introduce the self-driving Jeeps on the track, he says it again.
Yes.
When they introduce the voice of Richard Kiley, who is narrating the tour, says it again.
Who is that?
He was a character actor for years with a very distinctive voice. He's now deceased as well. He was pretty old when this movie was made. So, and the very last time is when he is eating ice cream with Ellie, and she says it's good. They don't know where Alan, Lex, or Tim are at this point. They're still out in the jungle. And she says, yeah, the ice cream is good. It's a very sad scene because he has described his flea circus history, why he does this, that he's an illusionist. He's told her basically his life story and how this was going to be his final great illusion. And she points out to him but that's just the problem. It is just an illusion. You
never have control.
You never have control. And the people you love are out there at risk of dying. Then she says, the ice cream is really good. And he says, spared no expense. It's a very sad scene.
Yeah, she's kind of laid him bare because he's sort of at the beginning of that scene, he's still holding on to his denial and his belief that he can still make the park work. And he says at some point, I think it might be his first line when she comes over, that they'll be fine. He's talking about his grandchildren. They'll be fine because they're with Dr. Grant, who better to get them through a dinosaur park than a dinosaur expert. Which, okay, sure. But also, maybe now is the time to actually reckon with the fact that you brought your grandchildren to your dangerous dinosaur theme park.
And you used the right word there. This is his reckoning. And yet he still doesn't get it. At the end of this scene, as sad as it is, he has still not been fully convinced that he can't remake this park and do a better job. He does not come to that full realization until his grandchildren, are safe in the Jeep and they're taking off, and Grant says, I'm not going to endorse your park, and he says, neither am I. Although he says it in such a way that you don't believe him. He this might be his scene of reckoning, but he has still not reckoned with this.
even after that, when they're all getting in the helicopter, he walks away from the helicopter to stare wistfully at the park that almost just killed him and his grandchildren.
Yes.
And Grant has to grab him and steer him into the helicopter.
And then when they get inside, the rest of them are just wiped out. Some of them are sleeping. They're looking at each other wistfully. And he's sitting there staring at that cane that he has had created with the amber and the mosquito in it. And that's what he's looking at. And you just know, because we know now that there was a sequel, but you just know what he's thinking. He hasn't given up. So a couple of other lines are, Nedry's scene with Dodson, where he says, Dodson, we've got Dodson here, because he doesn't want to be announced that he's a spy. Another thing about that scene, when Dodson gets out of the car, he leaves the door open of the cab, and the cab driver has to walk around and close it, and is cussing him out as he walks away. And that's another thing going on in this movie. There's definitely a separation of professional, educated people with working class, the workers, the worker bees. The worker bees are always going to get killed. They're always going to have the door left open for them while the well-paid spy walks away. So, that's another thing. But anyway, so the life finds a way. That's a big line in here. And hold on to your butts. Okay, so he says this twice in the movie. This has become a very famous line in movies.
Do you think he means the butt on your body or your cigarette butt? Because he's constantly smoking in this movie.
That's a very good comment, and I am laughing hysterically.
Like, he's literally holding the butt of a cigarette as he says it.
It probably is supposed to mean his butt, but that it's a great double entendre for this particular character, and I had never noticed it before. Well done, Tess. That is great. But anyway, so great thing about this scene and that line and all of his lines, he has a lot of good lines, is that this, I don't know about you, but this is the first time I have ever seen Samuel L. Jackson in anything. And he instantly, I thought, this is a great actor. He had instant appeal. He's charismatic. He was funny. And after that, every time he made a movie, I went and saw it. And of course, it wasn't his first movie. He was in the Quentin Tarantino movie.
Oh, yeah. Pulp Fiction.
He was in Pulp Fiction a year later, but we hadn't seen him in that yet. And he probably was in other movies. He was an actor in the 80s. But they were probably small character type roles. And this one really catapulted him into a real career. And he went on to become a major star of the Marvel movies and other things. He's made a lot of different kinds of movies. He's been in so many things. He's been in so many things. And he has not been typecast. I mean, I guess he is a little typecast now that he's older and he gets outrageous. He mostly gets outrageous characters. So that's what he's been typecast as. But really, he's done a huge variety of roles, and this was the first time I saw him in anything.
And I'm not sure how many Tarantino films he's been in, but I know he was in The Hateful Eight, so he's also like a Tarantino guy. Mm-hmm. He's in multiple. Oh, okay. He was also in Django Unchained, it looks like. So yeah, he's.
Oh, that's right. He was in that. Yeah.
Yeah, he's a Tarantino guy on top of being Nick Fury, and and it's not just that he's in Marvel movies; it's that he plays Nick Fury, who I think to most people who don't read comic books, they would have no idea who that is prior to him showing up in the Marvel movies. But he is like a pretty important character to the comic books and always has been. Oh, yeah. So casting him as Nick Fury was kind of a big move.
It was a big thing. Yeah, it's a big deal.
Yeah.
So in the movie, he says, hold on to your butts twice. He says it when they initiate the self-driving tour. So he says it then. But then again, when he tries to reboot the computers by shutting down the power, he says it again then. So it's interesting that at the beginning when they're still hopeful, and then at the end when everybody's dying, he's got this really important line. And the only other one, I have a lot of lines written down, but we don't have time for all of them. So the one that I really found to be hilarious, because I think this is the first time I noticed it, or that it clicked for me, was when they get in the self-driving cars and they get to the big gate, and Malcolm says, "What have they got in there, King Kong?" And as the doors swing open to the park, they do look like the gates in King Kong. I had never noticed this before. I don't know how I never noticed it before, but and actually this particular visual has kind of overtaken the visual of the King Kong doors, because now every time I see something that has big, gates, wooden gates like that, or, I think, oh, there's a reference to Jurassic Park, but actually it could be a reference to King Kong, because this is what this is. I think it's an homage to King Kong, and it's a very important scene. So anyway, that I have 100 other lines, but everybody's seen the movie. Everybody knows what the lines are. So
prior to Jurassic Park, Samuel L. Jackson was also in Do the Right Thing in 1989, a seminal work by Spike Lee.
Oh my God, it was
Yeah, I did want to talk about the sea bass scene again. There's probably a better way to refer to it, but the scene where Malcolm, Sattler, and Grant take turns ripping Hammond to shreds. First of all, just going back to the "it's always women who scream" thing, there is an intentional choice to focus in on Ellie's inability to eat, and I was paying attention to this because I always remember it. It's always Ellie who looks disgusted at the food. In the wide shot, you can see that she's literally the only person who's been fed yet. They gave her food first. So they
what scene is this?
So this is the scene right after they watch the raptors getting fed. They go to dinner, and it's like, in some ways it's a filmically like fantastic scene. If you're looking at it from a realism point of view, it's kind of weird because the room that they're eating in is just like a bizarre room to use as a dining room, which I think they did so that they could do these dramatic shots. At first it sort of looks like they're at a dining table in the middle of this like dark void, but then it's very clear that there's like a projector projecting something on one of the walls, and then it kind of looks like maybe there are multiple projectors projecting things on different parts of the walls. It's just like a very weird dining room, which I almost feel like they set up entirely so that they could do this gorgeous shot of Jeff Goldblum just slightly from underneath him with the projector like right behind his head, shining behind him and creating this like halo around him. Yeah. As he does that speech that you mentioned earlier, where he talks about, you stood on the shoulders of geniuses. And that was the other thing that I wanted to talk about. It's a great speech, and I think when he gets to the end of it, he has said something that's a little bit more correct, but I do feel like his initial point is not exactly the problem, because he says that the problem is that your science didn't take any discipline to attain. And that, you stood on the shoulders of geniuses and then you did the next thing. What he's describing is just how science works.
Yeah.
Every advancement in science
builds on the previous
relies
one. Yeah.
Relies on the discovery of the previous person. Using previously established science doesn't mean that you required no discipline to attain that next step. And even if that's true, that's not the problem of what's happening here. The problem is what Ellie says, which is that control is an illusion. The problem is this belief that you can create these animals that have not existed on this planet for millions of years and assume that you know how they're going to act. Yeah. Ellie's speech is much less dramatic, but she's much closer to the correct point. She talks about the plants that they have in the visitor center are poisonous. You chose them because they look good, but these are animals that have no idea what century they're in, and they will behave accordingly. Yeah. The problem here is not that this is new science. The problem is that these are giant, dangerous animals that have never been observed by humans in the wild, and you have no idea what you're going to do, and you are assuming a control that you do not actually have any real reason to believe that you have, especially because apparently the one place where expense was spared was in the computer systems that control your security fences. Yeah.
And I wonder if that wasn't a Crichton thing. I can't remember if it was in the book or not, but the whole concept of you didn't earn this because you didn't build it yourself, that might have been Crichton's influence on the scene.
Probably.
But you scientists were so preoccupied with whether they could, they didn't stop to think if they should. This is the God question. This is the Frankenstein question. And I think it's a very good question. It's a very valid question. Yeah. We're at that point. We're at that point in history right now with AI. We know we can, but should we? And there's a lot of discussion in the media and in social media and among everyday people right now about the ramifications of AI. How is it going to affect us? Are we going to have jobs? Is it going to kill us? Is this the end of mankind? So those are all really valid questions, and I'm glad we're taking the time to think about them and discuss them. But at the same time, there are all these scientists over there just going ahead with what they want to do. And they're just building it. Oh, it'll be fine.
I think calling them scientists is actually being a little too generous.
Well, yeah.
They're tech bros.
They're tech bros. Very good. They're tech bros. Oh my God, yeah.
But yeah, what is it? One of the things that Grant says is something like, the world has just changed so much and we're all just rushing to catch up. Mm-hmm. I do think that's a very accurate description of where we are still at. I mean, it was true then in 1993 and it's still true now. There's been an explosion in technological advancements, and it has been, for the most part, guided by capitalism and greed and not by what is best for humanity.
Yeah.
And I think that's especially true with AI, for sure.
And it's why the tech billionaires are so furious at the government for wanting to regulate and observe and control, because that's how they make their money. These tech billionaires have made, just this week, Google lost their case for their antitrust case. Yeah. And we have a really good antitrust person in place right now who's running that department. I think it was department FTC, maybe Federal Trade Communications. She's doing a really good job. We need to keep doing that, because without some kind of government oversight, we are at the mercy of these tech billionaires whose only goals are to, not even at this point make money, although that's part of it, but just to see how far they can extend their reach over society.
But that's kind of how they make money. Like the thing that's, and I could probably go on about AI forever, so I'll try to keep this short.
It's pertinent to this, though. I think it's very pertinent.
Yeah, but like part of what's happening right now is because people like you and I, normal lay people, don't necessarily understand how AI works. These tech bros are pretending that AI can do way more than it actually can. So they want you to think that that it's expanding in this incredible way, when in reality, it's actually pretty limited in what it can do. And there's a pretty decent reason to believe that it's not actually going to get much better at the rate that a lot of these guys are saying that it will. I was listening to the Adam Conover podcast where he was talking to a guy who knows all about this, and basically the data that these AI train themselves on, we're kind of running out, or at least we're running out of new kinds of data that will actually teach them new things. But also the other side to that is, if we're talking about AI specifically, AI is essentially a plagiarism machine.
At this point.
I actually think,
just in terms of right, yeah.
Yeah, I wish there was a way that we could shift from calling it AI and instead just call it what it is, which is a plagiarism algorithm.
Well, but it has the potential to do a lot more than that. That's the scary part.
It maybe does, but the people who are telling us that are the people who want to make money off of it. But right now, AI can only do anything by scanning works that human beings have already created, and then essentially, it scans a certain amount of text, and then it basically spits out a new version of that text using a kind of predictability algorithm to decide what word goes next. And the tech bros who want us to believe in AI are telling us that it's writing this, it's coming up with this stuff, and it knows what's real and what's not.
It's synthesizing it and creating new.
The AI knows nothing. No. It has no intelligence. This is why I think calling it AI...
It's programmed. Yeah. It's programmed to analyze and synthesize, but it's never... The theory is, what you're saying, I think, is that it's never going to be able to build on its own intelligence and develop new ideas. But the scary part of that is, what if it can? So that's, I think, people who are the fearmongers, and I'm in that group, who are afraid of it, are worried that that's going to happen. But why are we afraid of that? And that brings us back to this movie. Yeah. It's because of our science fiction culture. That's why we're afraid of it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. For sure. There have been so many movies that have treated AI like it is, like, the second we call anything. I mean, again, like, we're calling this AI. What we are calling AI bears no real resemblance to what science fiction movies have called AI. What we are talking about is not something that has intelligence. You said analyze. I would argue it doesn't even really analyze.
Maybe not.
It just scans and
it.
Scans, chops it up, spits it back out. And this is how you end up getting the Google AI results telling you to put glue on pizza, because the AI has no ability to assess what it has written. It has no ability to see what is true and what is not. It does not think. It is just scooping up words and spitting them back out.
And the ability to think requires a brain, unless they can create an artificial brain. And that's what I think they want to do. And, that's a little scary too. But anyway.
I'm sure they want to, but the guys who want to, like I said, are not scientists.
They're programmers.
They're tech bros. Anyway, back to the movie.
But what about filmmaking? I think this is a really beautifully and intelligently made film. Clearly made by a human, not an AI. Yeah. So the cinematography is just, and I am not a visual person. I don't usually notice these kinds of things. And maybe it is because I've seen it so many times. But all the cutting, the edits, the jumps, and are just beautifully done. And I think this is what Spielberg is known for. But when we jump from the amber to the fossil, when Nedry turns off the video cameras, and then we cut to Roy lighting his old-fashioned lighter. Arnold, I should say. His first name's Roy. His last name's Arnold. Arnold lighting his old-fashioned lighter. It's a wonderful cut. Nedry's aerosol can of embryos, when he loses it, and it's getting it's flowing down into the mud, and it's getting covered up in the mud, and then you cut right to the water flowing out of the drainage ditch where Alan and Lex are sitting, and he's trying to calm her down. That's a wonderful cut. And then, the one that I already mentioned, where she says, unless they figure out how to open doors, followed by the door to the kitchen where the kids are being opened by the raptor. And then overall, just the cutting back and forth between the two stories once we get into the two groups being separated. So once the Alan and the kids are out there and everyone else is in the bunker, basically, they cut back and forth between those two stories really well. And that's beautifully done. The climbing scene, we talked about this already too, when they're trying to outrun the Jeep as it falls down the tree, and then it falls on him and lands on them, and then they at the end of the movie, same thing happens in the dining room. Oh, and then when the raptor walks in to the dining room the first time, when we see him first come in, and Lexi is holding her green Jell-O, and this is a great scene. She's holding that Jell-O, and her hand is shaking. It starts to shake, and we've had impact tremors throughout this movie, and that's another common theme in here. These impact tremors, and she's not feeling it. She's seeing it. Sees the raptor walk in, and then he aligns with the picture of the raptor on the screen. That's really good. There's just so many things like this in here. There's and
it was such a good choice for her to be, because she could have been scooping into anything, but it's Jell-O, which really exaggerates the shaking in her hand.
Mm-hmm. The use of mirrors and reflection, that happens a lot in here. So when the Rex is chasing the Jeep, and Muldoon looks into the mirror, and the mirror says, "Be careful, things are not as maybe closer than they appear." Yeah,
objects in mirror may be closer than they appear.
Which is a real thing. Yeah. And for a long time, mirrors said that. I don't know if they still say it or not. But the kids in the kitchen, when they're trying to get away from the raptors, and there's reflections everywhere, and then Lex, so she gets into this cabinet to save herself, but she's absolutely afraid that the raptor's coming for her, because she's seeing his reflection, but he's also seeing her reflection. He hits the wall.
I've always interpreted that as she's tricking.
Oh
the
no,
raptor.
I don't think it's deliberate at all. She's frantically trying to get.
She knows that's a reflection.
Well, she's frantically trying to get the door down, because she is afraid he's coming toward her. She sees the reflection, and then he sees her reflection, so it's a double.
But I think. But she knows that he's in a reflection. Like she knows that it's coming towards her, but she also knows that it's gonna hit that reflection.
Well, I think it's nebulous. I've always seen it. I think she's a little afraid he's coming toward her. Maybe part of her brain does, but the fear part is making her think he's coming right toward her.
I think it makes sense that she would still be trying to get the thing down, but I also think that she because she could have chosen to run away instead, but I feel like she does know that it's going to run at her reflection. You know?
And at the end when we have the Deus Machina, it's that's just, I think that's brilliant, and everybody who sees that film the first time knows exactly what's happening, because everybody studied Deus Machina in high school. Even if you hated it, you know what it is. So it's just this weird thing that comes out of nowhere and saves the day, and doesn't make any sense. Shouldn't have been able to get in. We've already discussed this. He shouldn't have been able to get in. There is no way he got into that bunker, and yet there he is, clearly put there by the Greek gods, you know. Oh, one last thing that I noticed that I had never noticed before, and I can't tell you how many times I've seen this movie, because after we saw it originally, we rented it many times, and then we bought the whole series. We've seen these movies dozens and dozens of times, and yet at the end there, when they're in that beautiful scene where they're in the helicopter and it's flying away over the ocean with the sunset on it, and then Alan looks out the window, well actually Ellie looks out first and notices, and there's birds flying. I swear to God, I thought for years those were pterodactyls.
You might be confusing it with the third movie.
Maybe so.
Because the third movie ends with a very similar shot, except it's pterodons.
Because the whole thing is about migration, that the animals might migrate off the island. Okay.
I do believe it's pterodons, not pterodactyls.
Okay. Well, anyway, so for years and years, I thought that's what that was. And I looked at it today. No, they're pelicans. Some kind of pelican, because they're much bigger and herons are big, but they don't have a big head. These have a big head, and they focus on that because it's a very colorful head. So, and they're smiling at the beauty of this normal animal that they're used to seeing flying alongside them.
And also because Grant in the movie is the main proponent of the theory that dinosaurs evolved into birds.
And there you go. That's a very good point. Yes, absolutely. But the ending scene is just beautiful. You've got a feeling of hope, and that beautiful, hopeful John Williams theme music comes up over that last scene, and it's just the best ending to a movie ever, except that there were 2 more movies. So
yeah. One of the other things that is kind of an undercurrent for about half of the movie is this kind of subtle competition between Malcolm and Grant.
Oh, yeah. Let's get into that. Yeah.
So they're like, Malcolm, first of all, Malcolm is Jeff Goldblum, who is just so incredibly charismatic. And Sam Neill is too, but in very different ways.
Mm-hmm.
Jeff Goldblum is this like over the top, kind of theatrical, charismatic.
Flirtatious.
And Sam Neill,
he's flirtatious with everybody.
Very flirtatious. And Sam Neill, meanwhile, is like much more stoic and kind of reserved. And as soon as Malcolm shows up and meets Sattler, he starts hitting on her pretty aggressively.
Oh, yeah.
And Grant does not like this, but also, I think to the movie's credit, he's not gonna like control Ellie's behavior. He doesn't warn her off of Malcolm or anything. He just kind of gets like a little bit of a scowl on his face whenever Malcolm starts aggressively hitting on her.
Well, now she's a lot younger than him, so he's got to know that his hold on her may not last, and as we all know, it doesn't. In the movies, in the book, it's never a thing. They are not a couple in the book.
Yeah, in the book, they are not a couple. Yeah.
So that's going on there, but she does not respond to Ian. She's not really.
Yeah, she talks to him, but yeah, I don't think at any point she's like.
She really is into Alan.
She's
into Alan. She wants to have kids with him. She's trying to convince him that children are good.
Yeah, she keeps doing these little things to try to get the kids to bug him in an effort to convince him to have children, which unfortunately, if you've seen the 2 movies, apparently failed. But that does bring me to kind of the final, because they spend the latter half of the movie not in the same place. So the competition between the 2 of them is really only up until the T-Rex attacks, and it kind of reaches its crescendo there. First, there's kind of a little bit of a scene between the 2 of them. I think after Ellie has gone off with the Triceratops, they're like talking about women and children, and I think Malcolm says that like he loves kids, he's got 3 of them by 3 different women, and that he's always on the lookout for the future ex-Mrs. Malcolm, which I've just always loved. And I think this time around I realized I think part of the reason I love that line is that it feels like the character is just openly calling himself a slut.
He is totally accepting of who he is. He's very comfortable in his own skin, and Alan isn't always comfortable in his own skin. So
exactly. Like Malcolm is very comfortable with the fact that he loves women and that most women can only stand him for a certain amount of time.
And then they go to Alan because he's a much more stable guy. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah. And that is when he finally asks Grant if they're together, and Grant implies that, I don't think he says it out loud, I think he just nods.
Yeah.
And so Malcolm's like fine with it. And it's interesting because the competition between the two of them is so subtle. It feels like it's entirely made up of Grant looking sort of annoyed and Malcolm just being this loud person.
Giggling.
But then it sort of feels like it reaches its crescendo when they're trying to rescue the children. So the children are in the other car.
Oh, yeah.
And Grant is the one who knows how to deal with the situation, so he's the one who first does something. He opens up the flare and gets the dinosaur's attention and then throws it off. But Malcolm, not to be outdone, and also as the person who already loves children, like also opens up a flare kind of unnecessarily and almost gets himself killed.
And actually almost gets everybody killed.
And I think they're also standing in direct contrast to Gennaro, who fled and left the children behind. You know, these two guys who both have different attitudes towards children are both immediately willing to put themselves on the line in order to save these kids. Yeah. It's their save the cat moment.
There's one more scene I wanted to mention that comes towards the end of the film they also thought was wonderful. I think Spielberg, you know, he was a student of film before he was ever a filmmaker, and he loves film. And there's a scene, well, that when the dinosaur, the Deus Machina, comes in and eats the raptors who are trying to kill the family group. And that's an interesting thing, too. There's two family groups there. Ellie and Grant are protecting the kids. They're one family group. And then these two raptors come in. They're a pack family, but they're part of a family. And they're you know, in combat. And then the T-Rex comes in and eats the raptors. And after everybody leaves the building, and they drive off in the Jeep, there's a close-up again on the T-Rex roaring like the king of the jungle that he is. And I immediately thought, that's like the lion at the end of all the MGM movies. That's where he pulled that from. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah, because the banner like slowly floats down in front of the T-Rex even. Yeah. I mentioned earlier the way that Crichton writes characters is that they just are their job. Spielberg's thing is fatherhood.
Yes.
Like, he's got to have
father figure.
A father or a guy with father issues. His whole, like, every single movie that he's ever made, he's like pushed in this fatherhood theme, and that is one of the biggest differences thematically between the book version of this and the movie version. The book version, Grant does spend some time with the kids and does like rescue them, but it's not like the book is not concerned with Grant like learning how to be a father to these children.
No.
He just happens to be near them and is not evil. But the movie like really ramps that up, and I think that's part of why Grant and Sattler are in a relationship in the movie, because there needs like for this
family
to work,
group.
there needs to be someone who wants Grant to become a father. So that's Sattler.
Yeah, and in the book, Grant actually spends a lot of time just explaining things to people. Really quickly about Crichton again, the way he does his novels, the way they structured is they start off with a big concept, and then he kind of circles the drain, getting closer and closer and closer and smaller and smaller and smaller until until you really you understand this. It's a circular thing. I always visualize it as being circular, because he starts with this outer story and then he moves in and then he moves in and you get more and more details, you get closer and closer and closer. And this is the way he structures his books over and over again. And Grant is his mechanism for that in the books. So he's telling the stories of how, you know, and it gets closer and smaller and smaller. And Ian is more of a narrator. He's the moral narrator. He's kind of telling the story sometimes. But in the movie, they do have both a camaraderie and a competition going on. And you described it really well, but they also bond. And they do bond over the children, I think. So I think you're right that it's the parent in them, and maybe it's just the human in them, because Ian has 3 kids and Grant doesn't have any, but they're both very human, moral people. And we should have probably talked about the evolution of Grant, of his attitude towards the park. That scene where they arrive in the Jeeps and they see the dinosaurs, and boy, this is why the actor is just so amazing. Sam Neill, it is perfect. He turns and sees the dinosaur, not believing his eyes. He takes off his glasses. He stumbles to take them off, and there's this look on his face like it's both. It's unbelievable. It's awe-inspiring. He just can't. He literally cannot believe his eyes. He had no idea there were going to be real dinosaurs here, and he has a million questions. And then he turns Ellie's head with his hand, so she looks at the dinosaurs. The whole scene is just amazing. But then there are a couple of other scenes where he also has that awe and that respect for these animals. One of them is when they see the raptor being born, breaking out of the egg, and then later on when he finds the broken eggshells. For just a few seconds there, you can see the awe on his face because life has found a way. But in each of these scenes, it quickly turns to horror. So the rape of the natural world, is, as Ian calls it, is a big theme in this. Anyway, it's just, the whole movie is just fascinating. I could go on about this for hours, and we probably should not. So should we get into, let's go to themes. So greed, power, the natural world, controlling it, science and technology, the follies of man. But some of the things I also took out of it were the awe and respect that they have for these animals that then quickly, becomes something else, is what we all feel when we watch the movie. We want this to be possible until we don't. And the respect for that power, they all succumb to the idea that remaking dinosaurs is a wonderful thing. For a couple of seconds. Ian doesn't. Yeah. Ian never does. To his credit, he never does. But even Alan, when the bird dinos are flocking toward them, and here's the thing, that's the other scene, is
the Gallimimus.
Yeah, when they're he sees these, what are they called?
Gallimimus.
There you go. They're flocking towards him, and he's watching them so intently and is so fascinated by them that it doesn't even occur to him that they might be in danger. Even when they turn, and he says, "Oh, and then they turn as a flock too." And Tim has to tell him, "Yeah, and they're flocking towards us." And in that scene, he says they usually do this when they're running from prey. And he still doesn't move.
From predators.
Still doesn't move.
Yeah.
So...
Yeah, and then they hide behind that tree, and then they see the T-Rex, and Lex is the only one who's like, okay, let's go. Mm-hmm. Let's go.
Yeah.
And Alan and Tim are both just staring open-mouthed as the T-Rex is eating this thing, and it's just like, no, go. It's time to go, guys.
Yeah, and that whole scene is like a minuscule description of what's happening through the whole movie. They are in awe, and then they're running for their lives. It's like Ian says in the second movie, oh, there's oohing and there's eyeing, and then there's screaming and terror and people getting eaten. So, and that's exactly what's happening during the course of this movie, and it happens over and over again. It's not just one time. It happens over and over. So that's one theme. Survival, those who do, those who don't. Ellie and Alan are survivors. The kids are survivors because they become real soldiers in the war for survival. And they really are, they get very good at it. And in that kitchen scene, you can see that they have grown up in a nanosecond. I mean, they've had to. Muldoon is also a survivor, which is why it does not work for me that they kill him off in the movie. It has never worked for me that they killed him off in the movie. It does not make sense.
Yeah. By that point of the movie, there's no one left to kill off who isn't like a main character,
Yeah.
I mean, I guess it could have been Hammond, but I think the problem with killing off Hammond in the movie as opposed to the book is Richard Attenborough is just so likable that, even though that Hammond is kind of the villain, it's hard to see him that way because Richard Attenborough just brings so much
gravitas,
pathos,
and warmth. That's it, pathos. Yeah.
To the role that it's hard not to love him. He does feel like your kindly old grandpa who just made a mistake.
He just made a mistake. Yeah, that's it.
And also because it would be really brutal for these kids to go through this experience and then like have their grandpa die.
They talk a lot about evolution in here. The dinosaurs went extinct. And actually, Malcolm talks about that at one point when he says, no, this is not like saving the condors. The dinosaurs had their chance. They went extinct.
That's a great line, but that is also an example of how we tend to simplify the concept of dinosaurs because, like, we are much more sure now that some species of dinosaurs evolved into birds. But the idea of referring to all dinosaurs as if they are one species is
Good point.
wild on a couple of fronts. I mean, like, there are many species of dinosaurs that did not live at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Different species of dinosaurs went fully extinct, and then other species of dinosaurs evolved. You know, this is sort of like if we had a term for all of the animals that were alive today, you know? Referring to the dinosaurs in this way is like, you know, imagine if we said, like, humans went extinct when the dodo went extinct, you know? Like, dinosaurs may have some traits in common, but this is not a single species. I forget exactly what it is, but I believe T-Rex and the Triceratops were not actually alive at the same time, I think.
There are 3 different eras, I think. So,
because the whole park is called Jurassic Park.
Right.
Jurassic is an eon of prehistory, but I think the T-Rex was actually alive during the Cretaceous period.
I was going to say that's another reason to question some of the science in here, is they might not get that. But that's not Crichton, because he said put them together. And actually, that's a whole thing about how they've manipulated the science, because these 2 creatures were not alive at the same time, but the scientists put them both in the park. So they chose that. But my point was about evolution keeps coming up in it. And I think one of the themes that we're supposed to think about is, have humans really evolved that much? Have we evolved to a point where we have the right or the authority to recreate a species that died out, or an era of species that died out? And, you know, humans did not exist at the same time as dinosaurs. So putting humans into a park with something that existed in a very different time in the Earth's history, because it's not human history, is scary and kind of stupid.
Okay, so I'm not an expert. I could be wrong, but I think if you tried to recreate the bigger dinosaurs today, they just wouldn't survive because the mixture of, like, oxygen in our atmosphere is different now from what it was
and the plant life
during
they
the
would
Cretaceous and Jurassic.
Yeah,
the plant life they would eat, but, like, literally, we don't have animals that are as big as some of those dinosaurs anymore.
Yeah.
You know,
no, we don't.
The biggest animals on Earth today are sea creatures. Whales.
Yeah. The blue whale, I think, is the big one. And I was just thinking, and they are supported by water.
Exactly. They don't live in the atmosphere. And I think it's literally like I don't remember if it's that atmosphere is thinner or thicker now, but it's like literally the atmosphere doesn't support such a huge structure anymore.
Yeah.
And that's part of why mammals survived, because mammals were smaller.
So the other thing is the death of the characters, and we've touched on this just a little bit, but those we don't like Nedry and Gennaro, versus those we do and want to survive, like Muldoon and Arnold. So at least they are kind of fair at making sure that innocent people also are killed off, because it is a horror story.
I mean, my argument would be that no one in this movie deserves to die.
Nobody does.
Nedry is disgusting, but nobody deserves the death that he got. I think it's just that, you know, in order for this movie to be a little bit more palatable and a little bit more mainstream, you have to make the characters who die a little bit less empathetic. And I think maybe that part of the reason that Muldoon is one of the characters who dies is not that he's less empathetic, but that he feels so, like, tough. He doesn't seem vulnerable at all.
Yeah.
And all of the other characters have moments of vulnerability, including Hammond. Hammond is an old man who walks with a cane. He feels very vulnerable. There's a sort of a psychological feeling that, like, people who are vulnerable, it's like sadder when they die for whatever reason.
Yeah.
Whereas Muldoon, you know, feels like a big tough guy. It's kind of like, well, you know, he can take care of himself. And that makes us feel like, you know, maybe it's not as upsetting.
And characters have to die in these kinds of movies to get the point across that this is dangerous.
Yeah.
The risk that's involved,
stakes,
the risk that you have taken with people's lives. There has to be something that showcases that to the characters who created the mess to begin with.
You could also argue that Muldoon basically dies so that Ellie can survive.
Well, he does. He sacrifices himself. But Muldoon, to me, in my mind, has always been like Ripley in Alien, which is why I keep coming back to Alien. They are the people who are supposed to be the voices of reason. And Ripley survives and Muldoon doesn't. Although he does in the book.
If there is a villain of the movie, it is Hammond. Sure.
He's the ultimate villain. You can try and say that Nedry's a bad guy or Gennaro's a bad guy, but they are aspects of his personality. It's just done in a different way. He's an illusionist. He's better at covering up who he is.
Yeah. Even if Nedry is a bad guy, he's only there because Hammond hired him, because Hammond picked the guy who bid the least on the job without thinking about it any more than that.
Yep.
I wish there had been a line where Muldoon said that he wanted Hammond to euthanize the raptors, because I don't understand why no one actually says that. Why no one comes up and says you should get rid of the raptors. They're not a good attraction. They are just added danger.
Well, and I do think I get the impression that it's implied that he's been arguing with Hammond about this.
If it is implied, it is so vaguely implied that it's easy to miss it, because that is not the impression that I get. The impression that I get is that he has respect for how dangerous they are, but it does not really sound like he has ever made the argument that they should be killed. It sounds like he's actually a little bit fascinated by how dangerous they are. Like he is afraid of them and respects them, but it kind of sounds like he, to some extent, enjoys seeing how much they can do, because he's in awe of it.
Exactly. Here's a good point that you're making, and maybe didn't intend to make, but all three of them, Hammond, Muldoon, and Arnold, they are all involved in an ongoing project that they have to know is incredibly dangerous, and yet they proceed. Even though, Arnold says we have all the major problems of a major theme park and a zoo, he knows he can see the computer problems. Got 151 glitches he's got to fix. Muldoon knows how dangerous these animals are. Hammond has been told this over and over again. They are all three morally complicit in the death of these other people. So it's a hard thing when you step back from the story. It's a hard thing to grasp, because they're all complicit. So, should we go on to hot takes?
My hottest take is just that it's absurd that the Jurassic World movie is so much more sexist than this movie. Or I guess to put it a different way, it's crazy to me that Jurassic Park is a more successfully feminist movie than the sequel that was made almost 20 years later.
I think you're right. Yeah. And the women in this movie, two of my questions for the last part of our discussion are, does the movie hold up, and how are the women treated? And I think we've talked about the women. I would have liked a little bit more from Ellie in the first half of the movie. I think she does come out as a major force in the second half of the movie. But she's basically the object of flirtation in the first half. She flirts with Grant in the Badlands. She's flirtatious with Ian on the helicopter ride, and again in the Jeep. She's kind of background noise for a while. We know that there has to be something there because she's a doctor. And Alan, who is very smart, comes across as an expert, has a lot of respect for her. So there has to be something there. She doesn't really shine till the second half of the movie. So I would have liked to have seen a little bit more of her.
I do love the scene where she's digging through the dinosaur shit.
Oh, yeah. That's the turning point for her. So tenacious. You have no idea. Yeah.
It's also interesting to me that in that scene, that's one of Grant's scenes of being overwhelmed by the awe of it, because he just loves Triceratopses. Yeah.
I related to it completely. How you could get drawn into this and want to hug this animal that you have dreamt about and read about. And yeah, Triceratops was your favorite dinosaur too when you were a little girl. And it's his. And he talks about it, and it's loving. It's a beautiful scene.
But meanwhile, Sattler is the one who's trying to figure out what's going on.
Yeah.
He's overwhelmed by his awe, and she, from the moment she shows up, is examining the creature, pointing out different signs, figuring out what's wrong with it, figuring out that it's pharmacological, as she says, and then, she's, with no hesitation, asks to see the dinosaur's droppings. And then we cut to the scene where she's totally unbothered, literally digging through this pile of shit, while Malcolm stands off to the side just kind of horrified. And I think his line is, "That is one big pile of shit."
And then there's Lexi. She grows as a character, and that's what should happen in movies. the characters should grow. And all of the characters in this movie, except Hammond, do grow and expand and become more fully informed, more aware, more compassionate, more, more problem-solving oriented. They all get to that point. And Lexi is a great example of that. She starts off as this little girl who's just kind of involved with herself and is proud of herself for being a hacker. And they make fun of her a couple of times. But then she saves the day. She saves her brother. She saves all of them by getting the computers back online. So she really grows up, I think, a little bit in the movie. And I like that you're right, in the book it was just one character basically, and she wasn't very much of a character. Her brother was. They took that brother character and split it between the two kids and gave them both aspects of that character. And I thought that was really good. My other hot take is just that I was worried that I was going to be bored watching this movie again because I've seen it so many times. But as soon as I was 5 minutes into it, I was like, I never tire of seeing this movie. Now, I wouldn't want to watch it back to back 4 or 5 times, but every few years, I never tire of it. I see something new every time I see it. I think it's a brilliant movie. I think it's well made. I think the acting is good. Most of the writing is very, very good. There are some inconsistencies and questions and whatever. The cinematography is just amazing. Spielberg is a brilliant director. I mean, there's some directors in the modern era who have just been in our face a lot. Martin Scorsese is probably considered by most people to be the greatest director of the modern era, and I think that's a bunch
by some people.
Well, I was going to say I think it's a bunch of bullshit. I think he's one of the worst directors. He makes the same movie over and over again, and it's brilliant. Well, but it's boring. I'm sorry. Can it be brilliant and boring at the same time? I don't care. But Spielberg branches out, makes movies about all kinds of different things, and he's made 4 or 5 that has just been so good that they kind of represent modern filmmaking. One of them is Schindler's List, and that is a horrifying movie to sit through. I had to do it in 2 sections. We rented that, or maybe I did. I don't know if you guys ever saw it when you were little, because you were still little.
I've seen it
when it came out.
I don't think I saw it until I was a teenager.
Yeah, so I don't think. Yeah, I didn't want you to see it. I remember that now. So I rented it when you were not home, and I watched half of it and got to the scene where the young woman in the headscarf is shot by a grapevine, shoots her in the head. I had to stop watching it because up to that point, that character was the character of the movie that I related to the most. And it took me 5 days to get to a point where I could finish watching this movie. My point is that it is probably the best film ever made about the Holocaust. And after I saw it, I never wanted to see another movie about the Holocaust, and I have not, because there's nothing else you can say. He made the quintessential Holocaust film, and here he has made the quintessential monster film, because it's a monster movie, and he's a brilliant director, brilliant filmmaker. Just a really I'm really glad he's still making movies. He's just really good at it. So
I'm not as big a fan of Spielberg as you are, but I do think he has made some of the best films in American film canon. I think this is one. I'm also a big fan of Jaws.
Jaws is brilliant. And he was 25, I think, when he made that movie.
Yeah. And part of the reason that movie is brilliant is because of a technical malfunction, and he learned from that.
Yeah.
Like I mentioned briefly earlier, part of what we're doing at the beginning of this movie is the Jaws thing. He learned from Jaws that sometimes the best way to make an effective monster movie is to hide the monster for as long as possible. To just imply it and let your imagination kind of run wild. So, I mean, this is kind of an old trick for a lot of different kinds of horror movies too.
King Kong is hidden for a long time.
But like old gothic horror movies, sometimes the most horrifying stuff is the things that you can't see. The darkness at the edge of the screen where you can't really make everything out. And that's essentially what he does with Jaws. If anyone listening doesn't know, the story is that he did have a mechanical shark that they were supposed to use, and it sank. And so they had to film the first part of the movie basically without a shark for their shark movie. And if you've seen Jaws, it works really well. They did a really good job of kind of filming around the absence
and probably
of the shark.
The most famous opening scene of any movie ever.
You can see in Jurassic Park the lessons that he learned from Jaws. He's doing the Jaws thing. He's avoiding showing you the dinosaurs up until the grand reveal. And interestingly, the grand reveal is not of the T-Rex. It's of the Brachiosaurs, which kind of allows us to continue the Jaws thing. We've seen a dinosaur, but not the scary dinosaurs just yet. Even when we finally see the T-Rex, the first thing we see is just the hand, because it's like thrown part of the goat over the fence, and then we see its hand come back, and then we cut to a big like lightning flash as it chomps down on the rest of the goat, which I will say this time around, as I saw that, I was like, this kind of implies that she did this deliberately, because most of the dinosaurs are female, so I think we should assume female pronouns. It kind of implies that she deliberately pulled off the leg of the goat in order to throw it on top of the car.
And what is thrown on top of the car is basically a lamb chop. I mean, it's it looks like a leg of lamb. And there was a scene earlier on when they put the goat out there the first time, and Lexi actually says, "Why are they putting that goat out there?" So and somebody says, "Well, he's going to eat him." And then I think it's Ian. It's Gennaro.
No, she says, "Is it going to eat the goat?" And then Gennaro says, "What's the matter, kid? You never had lamb chops?" Yeah.
And what's thrown onto the car is a leg of lamb. There's another connection. There are a lot of connections between scenes in this movie. So, does this movie hold up?
I mean, I think it does. I'm biased. I think it's impossible for either of us to say for sure. I was immediately wrapped when I started watching it last night, even though I've seen it a million times. Now, to be fair, I am at the point in my life where I intentionally go a few years between viewings. I don't go out of my way to watch it because I want it to remain fresh, and any movie that you watch a million times is eventually gonna lose some of its luster. But it's definitely still one of my favorite movies. It has been for most of my life, and I think overall it holds up. It could have more female characters for sure, but the female characters that it does have, well, and I guess if we're including the dinosaurs,
there you go.
Technically it has way more female characters. But the female characters that it does have, I think, are pretty well realized. And now, again, part of that is because Laura Dern is just so great. But and I think it's very telling that this movie feels so much more feminist to me than Jurassic World did. And part of that is because Jurassic World as a movie was a blatant cash grab. When this movie first came out, the way we would call it today is that it broke the internet.
Yeah.
It was such a huge movie. It was made fun of on SNL so much for its popularity. It was a huge cultural moment. And anytime that happens, Hollywood executives never quite understand why it has happened, but they want to keep squeezing more money out of it, which is why this movie had 2 sequels that actually came out relatively soon after it, and why they revived it again 20 years later to make the Jurassic World series, which I think sucks, and sucks even more than the 3rd Jurassic Park movie, which I already didn't like very much. I do have a fondness for the 2nd Jurassic Park movie, which, I don't know, maybe if we want, we could cover, but, it is one of these movies that spawned a franchise that never really needed to exist. If this was the only Jurassic Park movie, that would probably be better than it being, this franchise that it is now. Although, again, I do have a fair amount of affection for Jurassic Park 2, The Lost World. But then they made the 3rd one, and the 3rd one is terrible, and then they made the Jurassic World movies, and those are all really bad. To be fair, I've only seen the first one. But my understanding is that the other 2 did not get any better.
Yeah.
I do genuinely believe that you can still see why this movie was so popular. Some of the moments of CGI obviously don't look as impressive as they did then, but this is a Spielberg movie, and Spielberg uses a lot of practical effects. And I think the shots that are clearly practical effects still hold up incredibly well.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of practical effects even when they look bad, I think practical effects are always going to hold up a little bit better than CGI. And I think this movie is a great example of that. The practical effects still look freaking fantastic. The CGI, on the other hand, has lost a bit of its luster. But I also think that this is maybe one of the most well-cast movies ever. Like
Perfectly.
all of the... And I actually saw, since I was watching this on Amazon, there was a little trivia thing about how Spielberg delayed filming so that he could get the exact cast that he wanted. Specifically for Richard Attenborough and Sam Neill, he delayed filming so that they could both be available. And I think that was a good call. I think they're both... I mean, you know, I guess you could argue maybe Richard Attenborough in some ways wasn't a great choice because Hammond is a bad guy and Richard Attenborough brings so much warmth to that performance.
But that's what he wanted. That's what he was going for. Yeah.
Yeah, that is what he wanted. And, you know, and I do think there's something interesting about that, you know, a lot of other films fail to do. I think it's actually really interesting when you have a character who makes bad choices but is likable anyway. Yeah. And I like that about Hammond. I like that I'm torn about him, that, you know, ultimately he should be the villain, but he's just a kindly old grandpa who never did nothing wrong, never. So and just everyone is so good. I mean, this is the quintessential Jeff Goldblum role. And he's so magnetic in this film. Also, I feel like no one has ever shot Jeff Goldblum as well as Spielberg did in this movie. He has so many beautiful shots of Jeff Goldblum's face and bare chest that, you know, have taken the internet by storm 20 to 30 years later. I guess at this point we are 30 years later. But yeah, like the shots of Jeff Goldblum in this film are still very popular on the internet. As I have said multiple times, Laura Dern is so magnetic and so fun in this role. It's impossible not to like her. And same with Sam Neill. Sam Neill is such a good anchor for this movie. And then Samuel L. Jackson, you know, it's a relatively small role, but he's Samuel L. Jackson and he kills it. And it's really upsetting when you find out that his character has died. It's like, damn, you know, you're upset that Muldoon died. I'm upset that Arnold died. Yeah. I liked him.
It was the worst death in the movie. Yeah.
I guess that's it. I do think it holds up, and I know I'm biased.
Well, I agree. I do think it holds up. The sequel, the first sequel, does work really well as a sequel. Probably one of the best sequels I've ever seen. There are a couple of things that, you know, the computer tech in the movie, as exemplified by when Leslie sits down in front of the computer and makes it all work. That's a little old. Yeah. But it's
so funny though.
But it's not terrible. And then the only other time is when she's looking at the thing in the Jeep and she says, "Oh, look, it's a CD-ROM." And, you know, in 93, that was a new thing.
That did just remind me, and this is a thing that I think I only noticed this time, when they are escaping the velociraptors and they climb up into the ceiling, there's a moment where the light is on the velociraptor's skin, and I just noticed
it's all code.
It's a DNA sequence.
Yeah. Oh,
it's
Gattaca. I was thinking it was code, but you're right, it's DNA. Yeah. That was beautiful. That was another one that I was going to bring up, but I had too much stuff to bring up. I do think Nedry's death was really hard for me. Maybe because of the glasses, maybe because of being the angry nerd. I'm not an angry nerd, but I do wear glasses. And just his death was just horrifying. Gennaro is not so bad. It was almost comic book-like in its nature. And it was quick. The scene with Nedry getting captured, that's the hardest part of the movie for me. Sometimes I fast forward through it because nobody deserved to die, even this creep. And it's just a horrifying way to die. And I think it was essential to the movie, but I struggle with it still. So I do think it held up. I love this movie 31 years later, and I will always be able to remember because it was released the week after my son was born. And so I will never have any problem remembering what year that was. So one of my favorite movies ever. Probably one of the best horror movies ever made. And it is a horror movie. It's a science fiction movie, but it's a horror movie. And I love Spielberg. I think he is one of the greatest filmmakers of the modern era. Coppola is probably my favorite, but boy, Spielberg's body of work is so much more extensive and so much more diverse. Plus, he's closer to my age. I think Coppola's in his 80s now. Spielberg's just like 10 years older than me. So I've kind of watched his career. Actually, in my 20s, I said, I want to be the next Spielberg. I want to do what he's doing. So I've always loved his work. Always loved him as a filmmaker. So, yeah, I think it holds up.
I think that's it.
Okay. Finally, that, dear listeners, is all for today.
I'm Tessa Dare. You can find me at my website, tessadare.com, where you can sign up for my email list, or you can follow me on Instagram and Threads at author.tess.adair, or you can find us on Patreon at patreon.com/whereyoulead.
And I am Beth Von Baron. You can follow me on Instagram at STL_writer_Beth. That's also my Threads thing. Or sign up for my weekly Substack email, Saturday Morning Musings, at stlwriterbeth.substack.com. This has been Woman Inherits the Earth, a podcast named for a scene in Jurassic Park. A discussion podcast about women and movies from the perspective of a mother and daughter. Thank you for listening to this very special episode that we loved producing for you. We hope you enjoyed it as much as we did, and we'll tune in for our next episode in about 2 weeks. See you then.